The night was thick with silence, the kind that presses against the skin and makes even the stars seem distant. Clara huddled beneath the low roof of the old barn, her knees drawn to her chest, shivering, not entirely from the cold. Every heartbeat echoed with the memory of the slaps and shouts, the sharp sting of words meant to wound deeper than flesh. Her stepmother's anger had been relentless that day, a storm she could not escape. And when the blows stopped, the verdict had followed, out. Pack your things, don't come back, her stepmother had said, voice flat, eyes sharp with a cruelty that knew no limits. Clara had left, clutching the small bundle of clothes she could carry, feeling the weight of each step as if the earth itself had decided to judge her. She wandered, unthinking, lost, the dark swallowing her with every hesitant pace. And then she heard it, a distant creak of hooves, a rhythm unlike the night wind, steady and sure. Fear sharpened her senses, but curiosity pushed her forward. A figure emerged from the shadows, broad-shouldered and silent, a man whose presence felt both commanding and calm. Please, she whispered, her voice barely a thread, help me. He paused, raising his head. Eyes as steady as the moonlight met hers. No hesitation, no judgment, only understanding. Come with me, he said quietly, his voice low but carrying a strange weight of safety. You're not safe out here. Clara's relief was immediate, yet tentative. Trust had been a stranger in her life, and fear had been her closest companion. But something in the way he stood, like he would protect the world if he could, but at least would protect her, made her step forward. He dismounted with practiced ease, holding the reins loosely. The horse moved like an extension of him, calm, reliable, tethered to his intent. Clara followed wordlessly, the barn disappearing behind her as they moved into the cold embrace of the night. The path to his cabin was long, winding through snow-laden trees. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy with understanding, with the unspoken acknowledgement of pain survived and danger narrowly escaped. Who are you? Clara finally asked, voice trembling. Call me Jack, he replied simply. I take care of people who can't take care of themselves, at least, I try. She looked up at him, noticing the dirt on his boots, the frayed cuffs of his coat. He was no stranger to hardship, and that recognition grounded her in a way words could not. When they reached the cabin, the glow from the hearth spilled into the snow, a promise that warmth and safety existed. Jack held the door open without looking at her, offering her the first gift she had received all day, choice. You can stay, he said. No questions, no judgments. Clara stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. The wind howled outside, but inside, the fire crackled and whispered reassurance. She had survived the storm that night, but for the first time, she did not have to face it alone. Jack poured water into a cup and handed it to her. She took it, feeling the heat seep into her frozen hands. I don't know how to thank you, she said, voice small. You don't need to, Jack replied. You just need to be here. That's enough. Clara studied him, realizing that real strength was quiet. It didn't announce itself. It simply held space for those who had none. That night, she slept by the fire, the warmth easing the sting of her stepmother's cruelty, while Jack kept watch just beyond the edge of dreams, a sentinel who would not leave until she could stand on her own again. And somewhere between the night's cold and the fire's soft glow, Clara understood a simple truth. Survival was no longer about hiding from the world, it was about finding someone who would see her as more than what the world had cast her to be. Morning arrived with a hesitant light, slipping through the cracks of the cabin's wooden walls and brushing against Clara's tired face. She woke slowly, the warmth of the fire and the quiet sense of safety pressing in around her like something she hadn't felt in years. Jack was already awake, standing by the hearth with his back to her, tending to the small breakfast he had prepared. His movements were deliberate, almost meditative, as though he had learned patience the hard way, through work, through loss, through a world that demanded resilience. You don't have to get up, he said without turning, voice low but steady. Stay by the fire if you want. Clara hesitated, then rose. She wrapped her hands around the warmth of the mug he offered, letting the steam rise to her face. The small act of kindness, the first in a long time, made her chest ache. Gratitude and wariness intertwined, forming something fragile and new. Why help me? She asked finally. Jack paused, his hand still, gaze lifting just slightly to meet hers. Because someone needed to, he said simply. And because it matters who stands when the world walks away. She studied him in the dim morning light. His face was weathered, marked by years of solitude and labor, yet in his eyes there was a softness she hadn't expected. Not pity, not obligation, only choice. Days passed, then weeks. Clara learned the rhythms of the cabin, of the woods surrounding it, of the slow, quiet life Jack led. She chopped wood, tended the small garden, carried water, and in each act found a strange sense of purpose. Jack never demanded gratitude, never asked her to speak of the past she carried like a weight. He offered only presence, patience, and the unspoken promise that she could rebuild herself without fear. Trust grew, not in grand declarations, but in small moments. The way he checked the fire without being asked. The way he left space for her to speak or remain silent. The way he respected the walls she had built around herself, walls made of fear, scars, and unspoken pain. One evening, after a long day tending the edge of his property, they sat outside the cabin, wrapped in blankets, watching the horizon bleed gold into the snow. "You've healed faster than I expected," Jack said quietly, breaking a long silence. Clara looked at him sharply. "I haven't healed," she replied. "I've just stopped hiding." He nodded, understanding. "There's a difference." She turned her gaze to the forest beyond, the skeletal trees etched against the twilight. "Do you ever feel like you're carrying too much alone?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Every day, but carrying it alone makes me stronger. And sometimes, it teaches me who deserves to stand beside me when I put it down." The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Clara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, not love yet, not trust fully, but something that had the potential to grow if tended carefully. It was on the third week that a messenger came from the nearby town, a man on a horse, breath steaming in the morning air. He brought news of her stepmother's actions, of rumors that spread, of the small cruelties that continued unchecked. Clara read the note silently, her hands trembling. She looked up at Jack, fear and hesitation warring in her expression. "You don't have to do anything," Jack said. "You have a choice now. You can stay here, or go face them. But no one will force you." She swallowed, drawing a long, shaky breath. I need to face it. To see that I don't belong to the past anymore." Jack's gaze softened. "Then we face it together." That night, as the moon rose high above the snow-laden trees, they walked toward the edge of the forest, side by side. Clara felt the weight of fear, yes, but also the quiet steadiness of someone walking beside her who would not let her fall. And in that moment, she realized something vital: survival had never been enough. Healing required connection, courage required trust, and hope, true, fragile hope, required choosing to stand in the open, even when the world still whispered that she had no right. The moon hung low, silver and cold, as Clara and Jack approached the edge of the forest. The snow crunched beneath their boots, a fragile rhythm that marked the distance between who she had been and who she could become. Ahead, the town's lights flickered weakly, ignorant of the lives they had touched with indifference. Rumors had reached here, whispers of her stepmother's cruelty, of her being cast out, of misfortune that was never hers to claim. Clara's chest tightened. Fear threatened to pull her back, to remind her that the world outside still had the power to wound. But Jack's presence beside her was like an anchor in a storm. Steady, certain, protective, yet never overbearing. He did not speak. His silence carried its own promise. She would not face this alone. When they reached the small street where her past awaited, Clara stopped. Her stepmother's house loomed ahead, windows dark, the weight of memory pressing in. She could feel the echoes of every harsh word, every slap, every command to leave. "I don't know if I can," Clara admitted, voice breaking. Jack turned to her, eyes calm, unflinching. "You've survived worse," he said. "And now you don't have to survive it alone. I'm here, every step, every breath." The words were simple, but they carried the kind of weight that could shift a life. Clara drew a deep breath, feeling the icy night air fill her lungs, and stepped forward. Her stepmother appeared at the doorway, eyes narrowing, disbelief and anger twisting together. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Clara lifted her chin, feeling strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm not yours to command anymore," she said. "And I'm not afraid." Jack stepped beside her, his shadow merging with hers. "Neither is she," he said. For the first time, Clara noticed the silence from the townspeople who had gathered, curious but unwilling to intervene before. Their whispers now fell away, replaced by the weight of something undeniable, dignity reclaimed, courage earned. Her stepmother's voice trembled, faltering, and Clara realized that power is fragile when it relies on fear alone. She did not gloat. She did not shout. She simply stood tall, her gaze meeting the woman who had sought to diminish her. The confrontation ended quietly, with Clara turning away, Jack's hand brushing lightly against hers, not as a demand, but as an offer of continued strength. Together, they walked back through the snow, leaving the past behind, step by deliberate step. Back at the cabin, warmth waited like an embrace. The fire burned steadily, the hearth solid, the air filled with the promise of something neither of them had dared name. Clara finally allowed herself to breathe fully, the tension of weeks, months, perhaps years, finally releasing. Jack handed her a cup of tea, their fingers brushing. She smiled faintly, a smile born not of relief alone, but of understanding. Real rescue does not come from pity. Real rescue comes from choice, from respect, from standing beside someone and refusing to let the world strip them of their humanity. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Clara and Jack built a life measured not by wealth or power, but by trust, kindness, and the courage to face the world together. She learned to work with him, to move through the forest, to care for the cabin and the land. He learned to open parts of himself that had long been guarded, revealing a man capable of tenderness as fierce as his resolve. And in the quiet of their shared life, Clara realized that the scars of her past no longer defined her. The echoes of abuse had not disappeared, but they had been transformed. She was no longer the girl abandoned at the mercy of cruelty. She was a woman who had been seen, chosen, and valued. Years later, people would retell her story, calling it a tale of rescue or luck. But the truth was far more profound. It was the story of dignity restored, of a life reclaimed from darkness by someone who understood that true strength lies in compassion and steadfastness. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that courage, kindness, and integrity can change a life, then subscribe, like, and share to keep these stories alive.